Later, Jasper and Levi returned to visit him and politely asked how he was feeling. The one-eyed man was furious. He couldn't accept that some strange psycho had actually managed to paralyze him. Jasper worried that the man probably didn't believe him anymore, but Levi confidently said that the one-eyed man still trusted him just like before. The one-eyed man watched the two of them with clear displeasure, silently hoping they would finally leave him alone. After a while, the boys returned to their own room carrying a bottle of drink, only to discover that it wasn't Sprite or cola like they expected. They decided they would simply go buy drinks themselves, but quickly realized they didn't have any money. At that moment, they both turned to look at the one-eyed man, who had fainted multiple times earlier and was now lying there deep in thought about the mysteries of the universe. Jasper walked over to him and asked politely if he would like to buy an expensive watch. However, the one-eyed man clearly had no interest in having any kind of conversation with them. Jasper continued insisting. He said the watch was extremely valuable, and since the one-eyed man seemed like a good person, he was willing to sell it to him. Then he proudly showed his wrist, where a watch had been carefully drawn using a black marker. The one-eyed man replied that he didn't want the watch at all. Instead, he wanted to know how they managed to kill the morning dog demon, and he was willing to pay for that information. Levi and Jasper exchanged glances again, thinking about what to say. Finally, Jasper explained that the dog had been obedient, cute, and fluffy. It even wagged its tail for them. Then they simply told it to cook itself on the electrical wires, and it did exactly that. The one-eyed man exploded with anger. The idea that a second-ranked demon would allow itself to be petted, wag its tail, and then obediently kill itself was completely ridiculous. He declared loudly that he didn't believe a single word they were saying. He added that if he ever truly lost his sanity one day, then he would go back to the psychiatric clinic himself and ask those lunatics directly what had really happened. Levi and Jasper looked confused, unable to understand who exactly he was calling crazy. Then the two boys calmly extended their hands toward him and said that since they had already given him the information, it was time for him to pay them. The one-eyed man let out a long, exhausted sigh. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a plastic bank card. Holding it out to them, he explained that the card contained roughly 500,000 yuan and calmly recited the password as well. He added that this particular card actually held the smallest amount of money he had, but even so, it should still be more than enough for the two of them to use. Then he spoke with a quiet, almost indifferent tone. He said he had no parents, no wife, and no children waiting for him anywhere. Considering that he might die at the claws of demons at any time, money meant nothing to him. It was just numbers on a card. Because of that, he told them they should feel free to spend it however they wanted. However, Levi immediately pushed the card back toward his face with a serious expression, saying that what he was holding wasn't real money. The one-eyed man raised his voice in frustration, explaining loudly that the money could easily be withdrawn from any bank using the card. But the boys simply refused to take it. They told him he should keep the card himself since he had tried to deceive them and hadn't actually handed over physical money. After saying that, the two of them casually walked out of the room, leaving the one-eyed man sitting there alone and visibly furious. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to a small park located not far from the clinic. High on the branch of a tree rested a second-ranked demon, a dark python silently observing the surroundings. The demon had received information that two humans who had absorbed the power of the morning dog were currently somewhere inside the nearby building. But aside from the faint aura of the morning dog, the snake could also sense the presence of a powerful warrior nearby, someone far stronger than the two targets. Because of that, the python knew it couldn't act recklessly. If it accidentally attracted the attention of a high-ranking warrior, things could become very dangerous. Instead, it decided to wait patiently for the two humans to come outside on their own. Just as the snake began slithering down the tree, it heard strange noises nearby. When it peeked around the trunk, it saw a couple standing close together and kissing. The woman then demanded that the man pay first before anything else happened. The snake thought coldly that if the warrior's aura wasn't nearby, it would have already transformed into its true form and swallowed both of them whole. Before long, the man left, and the woman remained alone. Leaning against the tree, she began counting the money she had just received for her work. Seeing that the woman was completely alone, the demon decided she could make a quick meal. One victim wouldn't attract attention from the warrior inside the building. Opening its massive mouth, the demon lunged toward her, ready to devour her instantly. However, at that very moment, the demon suddenly sensed a familiar aura, the lingering energy of the mourning dog, extremely close by. The snake immediately retreated and slipped behind the tree again, disappearing from sight. Meanwhile, the woman sighed in disappointment, clearly unhappy with the small amount of money she had earned that day. A little later, she stepped onto a path where two young men were walking toward her. They looked fairly handsome, so she waved her hand and invited them over, suggesting they could have some fun together. Levi and Jasper approached her calmly and asked if she knew where they could buy cola, get some quick snacks, and find something good to eat nearby. The woman misunderstood immediately. Thinking the two men were simply not interested in her, she told them not to waste her time if they weren't attracted to her. Levi and Jasper looked completely confused, having absolutely no idea what she was talking about. They repeated their question politely, asking once again whether she knew a place nearby where they could buy Coke or Sprite. After observing them carefully, the woman suddenly realized something unusual. She recognized that they were probably patients from the psychiatric hospital. That realization triggered a painful memory from her past. One day she had been running desperately through the streets searching for her sister. When she turned a corner, she saw a man pushing her sister to the ground roughly. The man grabbed her sister's stuffed doll and laughed cruelly, mocking her for calling the toy her child. Then, without any hesitation, he tore the stuffed doll into pieces right in front of her. Her sister cried helplessly, begging the man not to hurt her son. But the man only laughed louder, making fun of the mental hospital patient who mourned over a simple doll. At that moment, the woman had rushed forward trying to protect her sister, but it was already too late. Remembering that painful moment now, tears began forming in her eyes. She softly asked Levi where his family was. Jasper immediately pointed at Levi and said that he was his family. Levi then explained that his mother lived abroad, so right now his only family was Jasper and their clinic director. The woman quietly realized that Levi had essentially been abandoned, and his roommate had become the closest thing he had to family. Feeling sympathy, she handed them some money and told them that farther down the street there was a place where they could buy food, cola, and Sprite. However, the boys shook their heads politely and said they didn't need her money. The woman smiled gently and told them it was much easier for her to earn money than it was for them, so they shouldn't refuse her help. At that exact moment, the hidden snake sensed the mourning dog's energy again and suddenly launched itself toward Levi, intending to kill him and absorb his power. But Levi reacted instantly and grabbed the demon mid-attack, stopping the snake before it could sink its fangs into him. The snake was completely stunned. It couldn't understand how this human had reacted so quickly. Had he stopped her attack with a supersonic strike? Meanwhile, Jasper looked at the snake with genuine admiration and casually commented that the little snake looked very cute. Hearing that unexpected compliment, the demon actually felt a strange sense of embarrassment. She remembered how other demons had once told her that if she wanted humans to like her, she should appear as a small, adorable creature. Encouraged by that thought, the snake decided to approach them gently, believing that if she looked small and harmless, the humans would surely like her. However, when a nearby child noticed the snake, he immediately screamed in terror and ran away. Soon, all the other children playing nearby scattered in every direction, shouting that there was a snake. At that moment, the snake concluded bitterly that humans were foolish and ignorant since they couldn't even recognize her beauty. She decided angrily that anyone who called her ugly deserved to die. But when Levi and Jasper said she looked cute, the snake immediately felt happy again. She decided that after such a long time, she had finally encountered the right humans. At the same moment, Levi's system issued a notification saying it had detected a source of high-energy food that could suppress hunger for 3 days, and that food was directly in front of him. The system explained that the snake possessed second-rank energy. Although highly poisonous, it would become perfectly edible once its head was removed. Levi then turned toward the woman and politely asked if she could help them with something. Not long afterward, they arrived at the woman's small apartment, where she kindly began preparing a meal for them. A rich and delicious smell soon filled the room as something simmered in a pot. Levi and Jasper watched eagerly, barely able to wait. Inside the pot was freshly cut snake meat, slowly cooking after being marinated in wine. Beside the pot sat a jar containing the severed head of the demon snake. Levi remembered how earlier he had tried to cook the snake. He had grabbed it by the neck and raised his knife to cut it. However, the ordinary knife couldn't damage the creature at all. The blade simply snapped against the snake's tough skin. It quickly became clear that no ordinary human tools were capable of harming the demonic python. Left with no other option, Levi had grabbed the snake firmly and torn it apart using nothing but his own hands. Before long, the woman announced cheerfully that the snake soup was finally ready. She proudly said that she had always been known for her cooking skills back in Kakavka, and her daughter especially loved her homemade dishes. Then Jasper and Levi warmly invited the woman to sit down and share dinner with them, hoping she would join their small meal and enjoy the simple food and friendly company. The woman responded with a gentle, sweet smile and politely explained that she had already eaten earlier, so she truly wasn't hungry at the moment. The boys sincerely thanked her for helping them and for preparing such a delicious dish. Yet the woman softly replied that she should be the one thanking them instead, because they had kindly invited her to share their meal. Not long afterward, the guys stepped out of the apartment. Before leaving, they turned back and politely said their goodbyes to the woman. They expressed their gratitude once again for her help in cooking the snake stew and also for carefully packing the remaining food so they could bring it along with them. The woman waved it off modestly, saying it had been no trouble at all. However, she gently reminded the guys that they should hurry back to the hospital as soon as possible. Levi looked at her with admiration and said that her daughter was incredibly fortunate to have such a kind and caring mother. Those heartfelt words immediately brought tears to the woman's eyes. She gave them a warm smile, holding back emotion, and then quietly said goodbye. Soon the two boys walked down the narrow alley, planning to head straight back to the hospital. Along the way, they suddenly crossed paths with a group of people dressed in black and white suits. Levi glanced at the strangers with quiet curiosity, studying them carefully as they walked past. As the two groups passed each other, one of the strangers suddenly turned around. A strange chill ran through his body, as if he had just brushed past a warrior with terrifying hidden power. However, after a moment, he shook his head and convinced himself that it had only been his imagination playing tricks on him. Meanwhile, another squad of warriors arrived at the location where they had sensed something earlier. But when they checked the area, they realized the demonic aura had completely vanished. Their conclusion was simple: the demon must have escaped. Soon afterward, the one-eyed man received news that another demon had apparently died. He frowned and said their unit had never received such a report. In his mind, it was hard to believe that a powerful demon could have been killed by an ordinary human. At that moment, Levi casually walked into the room, holding a bag of food in his hands as if nothing unusual had happened. The one-eyed man explained that although the demonic aura had disappeared, everyone should remember that it had belonged to a second-rank demonic dark python. It might simply be hiding somewhere near the hospital, and with so many people around, safety had to be guaranteed. While speaking, his eyes suddenly fell on the bag of food that his roommates had brought back. When the container was opened, the man's face immediately turned pale. A horrifying realization hit him as a very familiar smell reached his nose. The squad of warriors nearby heard their leader shout in shock, but none of them understood what exactly had just happened. The one-eyed man quickly grabbed the dishes from them and carefully pulled out a piece of bone from inside the food. He placed the bone into a small detection device, and the result appeared almost instantly. It confirmed that the bone belonged to a second-rank dark python. Meanwhile, Jasper and Levi sat together happily, casually enjoying the delicious stew without a single worry. They joked that since the one-eyed man had refused to eat with them earlier, they might as well help themselves to his portion too. The man was completely confused. He could not understand how these two had managed to kill the python and then calmly eat it. After all, the creature's maximum strike speed was faster than the speed of sound. Determined, he decided he absolutely had to uncover the truth. Jasper casually commented that the snake had actually been very cute and friendly, saying it even seemed like it wanted to wrap around him like a hug. Then they added that the meat turned out to be extremely tender and surprisingly delicious. Hearing such ridiculous comments made the one-eyed man furious. He angrily declared that he would rather jump out of the window than trust these two idiots again. The guys looked at him in confusion, honestly not understanding why he suddenly seemed so irritated. Before long, evening arrived, and the ward slowly grew quiet, as everyone eventually went to bed. However, the one-eyed man couldn't fall asleep. He wondered if these two strange guys actually possessed rare innate bodies. Objectively speaking, they seemed weak, yet they had encountered two demons and remained completely unharmed. The more he thought about it, the less it made sense, and he suspected they had been hiding their real strength all along. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound and realized the two were still awake. Pretending to sleep, he decided to quietly observe what they were doing. Jasper and Levi approached him and softly said that they believed he was a good person. Jasper then said he would use the full power of his improved technique this time to heal him. Jasper calmly took out a thin needle and aimed it toward the one-eyed man's head. The man thought that if they truly had the power to kill two demons, they must possess at least some real skill. He decided to trust them one more time and see how strong they really were. Jasper then complained that the room was too dark and he couldn't clearly see the exact point he needed to target. Levi confidently replied that he had trained his technique for so long that he could hit the exact target even with his eyes completely closed. Without hesitation, he pushed the needle forward and forcefully inserted it directly into the man's forehead. The one-eyed man tried desperately to stay calm and not react, but the intense sensations rushed through him even stronger than the previous time. At that crucial moment, the needle hovered above the final point. Jasper knew he couldn't afford to make a mistake. The last point had to be struck perfectly. But suddenly the door to the room swung open. The unexpected interruption startled Jasper, causing his hand to tremble and miss the needle's target. It was a nurse. She screamed in horror, demanding to know what on earth they were doing to the other patient. The one-eyed man could barely control his emotions. Even he didn't fully understand what strange feelings were flooding through his body. Desperate, he reached out toward the door and begged the nurse to save him. But when the girl saw his hands suddenly fall limp, she screamed even louder, convinced that the two boys had just killed another patient. Moments later, doctors rushed into the ward again and quickly took the one-eyed man to the operating room. He was diagnosed with severe cranial hemorrhage and required immediate surgery. Jasper felt deeply upset and frustrated that he had failed to land the final needle correctly. Levi tried to comfort him, confidently saying that next time he would definitely succeed. Soon after that chaotic incident, both of them were firmly tied to their beds so they could not harm anyone else again. The protagonist quietly hoped that the one-eyed man would survive and eventually return to them alive. Meanwhile, the man was brought into the operating room where doctors shaved and disinfected his head, carefully removing every needle they could find. They did this because the area needed to be completely prepared before the skull could be opened for surgery. At that moment, the one-eyed man slowly opened his eye and stared at the doctors with obvious confusion. The doctor said it was actually fortunate that he woke up now, because it would have been extremely awkward if he had suddenly regained consciousness in the middle of the operation. After checking the monitors, the doctor said that all his indicators had returned to normal levels. Because of this, they would stop the operation and send the patient back to the ward for further observation. The doctor then asked whether he would be willing to remain in the hospital for a while longer. Although his mental condition was unusual, he was still far more stable than the other patients. Therefore, the doctor suggested transferring him to a separate ward. The one-eyed man simply stared at the doctor with a dark and menacing expression, saying nothing in response. The doctor then examined the patient's records and images again. He began to suspect the nurses had mixed up the charts, because the patient's spine and leg appeared to have healed almost magically, which should have been impossible. Turning back to the staff, he calmly announced that the patient no longer needed the cast anymore. However, when he looked toward the bed again, he suddenly realized that no one was lying there anymore. At that same moment, the one-eyed man had already found his clothes and quietly returned to his original room. He stood in front of Jasper's bed and calmly announced that he was the head of a special unit of national-level warriors, and despite that, he had already failed to deal with Jasper 3 separate times. He told Jasper that he should feel proud of what he had done, but deep down, the one-eyed man silently swore to himself that he would never trust those two psychos again. Every time he looked at his freshly shaved bald head, it would remind him of the strange and terrifying things they had done to him. At that moment, Levi turned toward him with a calm and confident expression and said that the man had returned alive and stronger than before. He added that next time, he was absolutely certain they would finally succeed in curing him completely. However, the one-eyed man clearly had no interest in continuing this conversation. Without another word, he walked over to the window, opened it wide, and calmly stepped outside while casually saying goodbye to his roommates. Before leaving, he firmly declared that their paths would never cross again and that this would be the last time they ever saw each other. But the moment he jumped out of the window, a nurse who had been standing nearby suddenly screamed in shock and panic, immediately calling out for the orderlies to come and help. To everyone's surprise, the one-eyed man landed on the ground completely unharmed. Still, the dramatic jump frightened the pedestrians nearby. As he walked away, he once again thought about those two strange guys, concluding that although they possessed innate bodies and bizarre combat styles, they were simply impossible to reason with. Later, someone reported the entire incident to the clinic's director. The director was furious that the one-eyed man had pulled such a stunt and, once again, the responsibility for dealing with those two troublesome patients had fallen onto him. Soon after, Lee also called the director and informed him that one of the people in the hospital had just jumped out of the window. However, Lee explained that the man had somehow landed safely without any injuries and then disappeared without leaving a single trace behind. At first, the director assumed that Lee was talking about one of the two unstable patients. But when he realized that it was actually the one-eyed man, he immediately relaxed and said that the hospital bore no responsibility for him. However, Lee had called him for an entirely different reason, and his tone quickly shifted to something much more serious. He pointed out that the man had just jumped out of the hospital window and left the building without paying the medical bill for his stay. After saying that, Lee did not bother waiting for a response and simply hung up the phone without another word. Not long after that, Levi and Jasper were carefully loaded into an ambulance so they could be transferred to another hospital facility. By this point, they already knew that the one-eyed man had survived the ordeal, but unfortunately, he had chosen to leave without staying to see them. Jasper still felt worried that the man's injured eye had not fully recovered yet, but Levi calmly reassured him that next time they tried the treatment, they would definitely succeed. Hearing this made Jasper emotional, and he suddenly started crying. He felt that he had disappointed the one-eyed man, and that was why the man had left without properly saying goodbye. Levi gently corrected him and said that the man had actually said goodbye to them before leaving. However, after thinking about it again, Levi remembered that the man had actually said they would never see each other again. So he awkwardly corrected himself and explained that the farewell had been phrased a little differently. Still, Jasper calmed down a little. In his mind, if the man had said goodbye, it meant they might meet again someday, and when that happened he would definitely be able to help him properly. While sitting there quietly, Jasper suddenly noticed a small box of apples placed on the windowsill and casually said that he really wanted to eat one. Levi reached out to grab an apple, and as soon as he moved his arm, the straps that had been tightly binding their bodies suddenly snapped apart. After freeing himself so easily, he casually handed one of the apples to his friend, who happily accepted it and immediately began taking big bites. Jasper happily said that Levi should try one too, because the apple was incredibly sweet, juicy, and wonderfully crunchy. Meanwhile, Lee's partner commented that Lee's deputy was incredibly generous and dedicated to his work, especially since he was personally transporting those troublesome patients again. Lee calmly replied that driving them himself would simply be safer. Besides that, he also planned to collect a certain debt from someone along the way. At the same time, something extremely unusual was beginning to happen at the city's first port. It soon became clear that a fourth-ranked demon known as a reef octopus had somehow broken free from containment. A squad of trained warriors quickly arrived at the port to confront the terrifying monster. They unleashed a variety of powerful spells and attacks, but none of their techniques seemed capable of harming the demon. Then they noticed something alarming. The creature's tentacles began releasing thick streams of dark ink. The warriors quickly realized that this was a deadly high-ranking technique known as death mist. At that moment, they understood the terrifying truth. This creature was not merely a fourth-ranked demon. It was at least fifth-ranked. Realizing the black fog was extremely toxic and could cause instant death on contact, they decided to retreat immediately. The warriors quickly turned and started running away, but the spreading ink cloud continued chasing after them relentlessly. One of the men soon realized that the spreading speed of the deadly mist was far too fast, and he quietly prepared himself for the moment when he would inevitably die. However, just in time, someone suddenly used a precise counting technique and blocked the deadly attack that had been about to strike him. At that moment, a man standing high above the demon on the steel beams looked down and said in an annoyed tone that he was already in a very bad mood. The warriors immediately recognized the voice. It was their boss. Sure enough, the mysterious figure was the one-eyed man himself. He calmly explained that he had come here specifically to vent his anger on this unfortunate monster. The warriors looked at him in confusion, wondering why their usually intimidating leader had suddenly changed his hairstyle so drastically. Then the one-eyed man unleashed a terrifying technique known as the Buddha's Dragon Palm, a strike so powerful it felt like it could shake the world itself. With a calm motion, he aimed his palm directly at the demon, and a brilliant beam of light burst forward, striking the creature squarely in the head. Meanwhile, far away on the bridge, an enormous traffic jam had suddenly formed. Lee and his partner looked around in confusion, unable to understand why the traffic had come to a complete standstill so suddenly. Then they noticed something strange. People were abandoning their cars and running away in panic toward the opposite direction. The next moment, a blood-covered body suddenly crashed down onto the windshield of their car. At that horrifying moment, both men realized that something terrible was happening and that the end might have already arrived. Meanwhile, the one-eyed man had already dealt with the octopus demon, but he quickly sensed that something still wasn't right. Even though the monster had been killed, he could still feel powerful waves of demonic energy spreading through the air. At that same moment, the warriors nearby noticed someone running desperately toward them. One of the special department agents urgently reported that they had encountered a serious new problem. They had just discovered another demon moving across the bridge, heading directly toward the city center. Meanwhile, real panic had already begun spreading across the crowded bridge. Levi and Jasper, still sitting in the ambulance, had no idea what was happening outside. They were simply thinking about what other food they might want to eat. At that moment, a strange voice echoed inside Levi's mind, telling him that after breaking through to the human level, his body now required a huge amount of energy. Although he didn't fully understand what that meant, he suddenly felt extremely hungry. Soon another demon appeared on the bridge. It was another octopus creature, seemingly searching around frantically, as if it were looking for its father. Meanwhile, Lee stepped out of the car and rushed toward the man who had crashed into their windshield, trying to revive him. He told his partner to grab some styptic medicine from the car, but his partner nervously insisted that they needed to run immediately because the demon would arrive any second. At that moment, Lee removed his watch and threw it to his partner, telling him to bring the medicine and then run away, keeping the watch as well. The man protested, saying the injured people were already in critical condition, and if he stayed any longer he would die alongside them. Then the deputy quietly began telling him the story behind the watch. He explained that on the very first day he became an operating surgeon, he saved a child's life, and the grateful child had given him that watch as a gift. From that very day forward, he made a solemn promise to himself that he would never abandon a dying person again, no matter how dangerous or hopeless the situation might seem. However, his partner quickly pointed out that there were still 2 patients strapped to beds in the back of the car. If they took those 2 and escaped now, it might be the only chance for any of them to survive. But Lee shook his head firmly and told him to forget about those 2 completely and focus on the people who could still realistically be saved. His partner refused to listen. He climbed into the car and began trying to free Levi and Jasper, warning them that a huge demon was already somewhere on the road ahead. At that moment, Levi casually stood up and brushed his hand across the straps binding Jasper's body. And just like that, the restraints snapped apart as if they were nothing. Seeing this, the partner stared at the patients in complete horror. Then he grabbed them by the arms and began dragging them along the road, desperate to get away. But Jasper suddenly stopped him and said they had an important question to ask. The boy began asking the man what kind of demon was out there, and whether it looked cute or not. The man pictured a gigantic pink octopus in his mind, smashing cars with its massive tentacles, and after a moment he awkwardly said that it was, well, an acquired taste. Levi thought about that answer for a moment, and then calmly said that if that was the case, they probably weren't going anywhere after all. Jasper smiled brightly and said that instead of running away, they should go find the demon and play with it for a while. Hearing that, the man looked at the two boys in absolute horror and shouted that they were completely insane and clearly real psychos. Meanwhile, the third-ranked demon known as the reef octopus continued rampaging across the bridge. As it turned out, the creature was actually female, and she was desperately searching for her father, who had already been killed by the one-eyed man. Levi stood there calmly, thinking about how her father would never return. Since that was the case, he decided that it was now his responsibility to deal with this demon. At the same time, Lee continued performing emergency treatment, desperately trying to stop the injured man's bleeding and keep him alive. He shouted for his partner to come help him, but by then the man had already run away somewhere and was nowhere to be seen. The wounded victim was already close to death, yet he still managed to gather enough strength to whisper words of gratitude to the doctor who refused to abandon him. Then the injured man slowly looked upward and saw that the demon was already moving closer to them. He weakly told the doctor to run away while he still could, saying that there was no need to waste time trying to save someone who was already dying. But Lee stubbornly refused. He said firmly that he was a doctor, and because of that, he would never run away and abandon a patient. The demon noticed the two helpless humans below and leaned closer, asking them in a strange voice if they had seen her father anywhere. She warned them that if they hadn't seen him and couldn't tell her where he was, she would kill them without hesitation. After saying that, the octopus slowly lifted one of her massive tentacles high into the air, preparing to strike the two men. However, right at that moment something unexpected happened, and the octopus was suddenly yanked violently to the side by an unseen force. Lee and the injured victim were shaking in terror, both fully expecting that they were about to die at any second. But when they cautiously looked up again, they realized the demon was no longer standing there. At that moment, Lee's partner suddenly ran back and explained that he had stolen a smaller car because the ambulance was too large and slow, and this vehicle would get the victim to the hospital much faster. Lee felt genuine relief when he saw his partner return, because he had believed the man had simply run away and abandoned them. After that, the man helped Lee lift the injured victim, and together they carefully carried him toward the waiting car. Meanwhile, somewhere beneath the bridge, the octopus demon crashed heavily onto the ground below. Jasper, who had been watching everything from above, was absolutely delighted. He looked excited and said he really wanted to play with this interesting demon. Levi grabbed one of the creature's tentacles and calmly told it to come down and play with them. Without hesitation, Jasper jumped down from above, aiming to land directly on the octopus. His jump was perfectly accurate, and he landed squarely on the demon's forehead. Then he began poking the octopus with his finger again and again, laughing as if he were playing with a toy. This behavior made the octopus extremely angry, and she shouted that she would kill these rude humans for treating her so disrespectfully. She swung a large tentacle toward Jasper to crush him, but at that exact moment, she suddenly felt something dragging her downward again. Jasper fell lightly to the ground, while Levi stepped forward and pressed his foot firmly onto the demon's tentacle. Levi casually explained that he had only applied a little pressure to stop her from attacking his friend, but somehow the tentacle had just come off. Jasper shrugged and said it probably didn't matter anyway since the octopus still had plenty of tentacles left. Meanwhile, the demon screamed loudly and began crying, calling desperately for her father and complaining that she was being bullied. Levi nodded thoughtfully and said that, in a way, his friend actually had a point. The octopus became even more furious and wildly swung her remaining tentacles, trying to kill the two humans who had humiliated her. But Levi calmly grabbed another tentacle, and just like the first one, it snapped off again with surprising ease. At that moment, Jasper wandered off into a nearby clearing and suddenly discovered an old barbecue grill sitting there. The octopus kept thrashing angrily while Levi continued pulling off her tentacles one after another. He grabbed another tentacle and stared ominously at the demon, but suddenly something in the air distracted him. Both the boy and the demon sniffed the air at the same time, noticing an incredibly delicious smell drifting through the area. It turned out that during all that chaos, Jasper had already placed one of the severed tentacles onto the grill and started cooking it. He happily prepared the grilled tentacle so he could share it and taste it together with his friend. Drawn by the delicious smell, the octopus demon hurried toward the grill as well, clearly tempted by the aroma. But when she realized that the delicious food being cooked was actually one of her own tentacles, she began trembling with shock and horror. Jasper sliced the grilled tentacle into pieces and neatly placed them onto a plate before offering them to his friend. The protagonist took a large bite from the tentacle and chewed thoughtfully before saying that the dish was actually incredibly tasty. However, Jasper soon announced that he had already cooked the very last tentacle they had, and there were no more left to grill. Even after eating all of that, Levi realized that he still wasn't completely full. The two friends then looked over at the octopus and noticed that she barely had any tentacles remaining. They quickly realized that at this point the demon was basically just a head with almost nothing else left. Right then, the two friends exchanged looks and suddenly came up with a brilliant new idea. Before long, the demon's remaining head was also placed on the grill and slowly cooked. Jasper hesitated slightly and said that the octopus's eyes were still open, so he wasn't sure whether it was okay to eat her. Levi calmly walked over to the grill and gently covered the octopus's eyes with his palm, saying that if there were no eyes watching them, then it meant there was no life left and they could safely eat it. Not long after that, the one-eyed man finally arrived at the scene together with his subordinates and immediately began asking where the demon had gone. One of the technicians stepped forward and reported that their instruments had detected faint residual energy waves that likely belonged to the demon. He walked up to the one-eyed man and showed him the readings on his tablet. According to the data, the last trace of the demon's energy indicated that it had moved somewhere beneath the bridge. However, when the team finally arrived at that location, the sight waiting for them was completely unexpected. Jasper and Levi were lying peacefully on the grass, fast asleep, as if nothing unusual had happened. The one-eyed man froze in shock, while a colleague nervously reported that the demon's energy waves had completely vanished. Yet strangely, the only people present at the scene were those two boys. The one-eyed man couldn't understand why fate had forced him to meet these two again, especially when he had already decided that he was saying goodbye to them forever. One of the workers continued examining the scanner in confusion, repeating that the last trace of demonic energy had definitely originated from this exact location, yet the demon itself was nowhere to be found. Then the one-eyed man noticed a barbecue grill sitting nearby, and the moment he saw it, a terrifying realization slowly began forming in his mind about what had actually happened there. One of the female officers suggested that they should take the two boys into custody for questioning, but the one-eyed man immediately dismissed the idea, saying they were just mentally unstable patients and there was no point in questioning or believing them. The girl looked confused and asked why he was so certain about that. Suddenly, the one-eyed man shouted loudly, saying he was embarrassed to even hear such a ridiculous suggestion. He angrily warned her that if she made such a basic mistake again, he would personally shave her head bald as punishment. The girl was completely baffled by his harsh reaction and secretly wondered if his strange behavior somehow had something to do with those two odd boys. At the same time, she found it fascinating that her commander had been able to determine the boys were mentally ill simply by looking at their hospital pajamas. She assumed he must know nearly every hospital in the city. It seemed obvious to her that the man truly cared deeply about protecting the city. Their discussion was suddenly interrupted when another worker asked what they should do next, since the demon had completely disappeared. The one-eyed man then calmly walked over and sat down beside Levi, leaning closer before casually asking him if the octopus they ate had tasted good. Levi slowly opened his eyes and gave a sleepy smile, answering honestly that it had actually been very delicious. Hearing this answer, the one-eyed man silently nodded, now completely certain that his terrible suspicion had been correct. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the headquarters of the Special Forces, where a meeting was underway to discuss the growing number of cases where warriors encountered demons that deliberately concealed their true powers. According to recent reports, the distribution map of monsters had been constantly changing, suggesting that the demons were becoming increasingly intelligent and strategic. The woman presenting the report quietly thought about how those two strange boys had somehow managed to defeat a third-ranked demon. They had already killed 3 demons, which made her wonder if they should be trained instead of ignored. But suddenly an unsettling image appeared in her mind, Jasper holding those terrifying needles of his. She continued her presentation, saying that if no one had objections, she would begin preparing the training plan immediately. But at that moment, the one-eyed man spoke up and suggested that perhaps it would be better not to proceed. Everyone in the room was stunned. They could hardly believe that someone had just openly challenged her decision. The red-haired woman, who was the head of the analytical department, introduced herself as Tracy and asked the one-eyed man directly whether he doubted her analysis and her plan. She explained that her proposal was to send all trainees from the 4 major academies to spend 1 full month inside a psychiatric hospital to strengthen their mental resilience. Then she casually sat on the table beside the one-eyed man, placed her hand on his head, and calmly asked if he had any objections to the plan. Everyone in the room secretly thought that such a simple test would easily allow anyone to qualify for the units. Many of them had objections, but none dared to speak up. After all, no one in the room had the courage to openly challenge the first military advisor of the capital's headquarters. However, the one-eyed man calmly said that a test like that might actually be far too cruel for newly graduated recruits who had little real experience. Tracy believed the one-eyed man thought her challenge was too easy, but the others knew the truth. He believed the test was actually far more dangerous than it appeared. Tracy responded by explaining that real combat strength is only forged on the battlefield. But before warriors are sent into battle, they must first learn how to face the unknown and deal with unpredictable situations. She added that their enemies were often just as unpredictable as mentally unstable individuals, which made psychiatric hospitals one of the best training environments imaginable. She finished confidently, saying it was wonderful that everyone else seemed to understand her reasoning. Meanwhile, the one-eyed man sat quietly thinking to himself that those 2 strange psychos were honestly more terrifying than any demon. He then asked Tracy what the recent pattern of demons appearing in waves actually meant, and she explained that the ebb and flow pattern was a classic military strategy designed to confuse their enemies. She revealed that somewhere within the enemy territory there were highly intelligent beings who were directing the movements of the lower-ranked demons. Hearing this revelation shocked everyone present in the room. Tracy explained that nothing like this had ever been recorded in history before, meaning they were facing a threat unlike anything humanity had encountered. She concluded by saying that they urgently needed to gather far more data to understand what was happening. 3 entire days passed after that meeting. In a quiet clearing near the psychiatric hospital, a pair of ants happily reunited with each other after being separated. But just as they were celebrating, they suddenly noticed a huge human hand descending toward them from above. A giant finger scooped up the male ant and lifted him high into the air. The giant turned out to be Jasper, who soon released the ant again. The tiny creature hurried back to his wife, proudly announcing that he had returned. However, Jasper quickly picked him up again and brought him closer to his face to inspect him carefully. At that moment, Levi called out to him, and Jasper happily lost all interest in the ant. He excitedly explained that while Levi had been asleep, he had discovered that ants could always find their way back home no matter how far they were carried, which he found incredibly impressive. He also mentioned that Levi had slept for 3 full days after eating the octopus, and during that time someone had brought them back to the clinic. Levi replied that he had not truly been sleeping. The strange voice in his head had mentioned something about forced sleep during a breakthrough, and it had also said that Levi had advanced to a new level and should try using his strength. Meanwhile, the pair of ants were desperately digging a deep hole in the ground, hoping to hide from the terrifying giants who kept disturbing them. At that moment, Levi decided to test the ability the voice had mentioned. He gently touched a nearby tree with his fingers, and a long crack suddenly appeared along the trunk. Only a second later, the entire trunk violently burst apart into pieces. Jasper watched this with delight and quickly realized that his friend had become much stronger once again. Meanwhile, the male ant suddenly saw an enormous tree trunk flying toward him through the air. Jasper thoughtfully guessed that Levi had grown so powerful because of the improvements in his advanced acupuncture techniques. Levi simply smiled gently and confirmed that Jasper's guess was correct. Meanwhile, the ant wife ran toward the crushed body of her husband and began crying loudly after realizing he had died in such a tragic way. Soon several other ants gathered around her and promised they would support her during this painful moment. The grieving ant cried even harder while thanking the others for standing by her. Meanwhile, more and more people began gathering in the clearing, curious about what had happened. They could not understand how such a massive tree had suddenly fallen. Nearby, Levi and Jasper approached a transformer box because Levi wanted to try something, but Jasper warned him that television always said those things were extremely dangerous. However, the strange voice inside Levi's mind calmly reassured him that everything would be perfectly fine. On top of that, he trusted his friend completely. Deep down, he believed that if anything dangerous happened, Levi would definitely find a way to save him. Those words filled Jasper with renewed determination. With a confident smile, he replied that he trusted Levi just as much and believed in him without any doubt. Still, Jasper looked at the distant transformer booth and wondered how Levi planned to get up there. Levi simply shrugged and calmly answered that he could just jump. With a single powerful leap that echoed through the clearing, Levi launched himself into the air and landed directly on top of the transformer booth. Jasper watched this incredible jump with shining eyes, clearly delighted that his friend had succeeded so easily. Just then, the head doctor happened to approach them and briefly examined Levi, quickly diagnosing him with what he believed was a serious eating disorder. But before the doctor could stop him, Levi had already reached out and grabbed the exposed electrical wires. Calmly, he remarked that it seemed like his plan had worked. At that moment, Levi felt a powerful surge of energy flooding through his entire body, as if an endless current was flowing inside him. Seeing this dangerous situation unfold, the facility manager quickly decided to call the clinic director, nervously explaining that they had a serious problem on their hands. Meanwhile, several orderlies rushed toward the transformer booth, joking grimly that Levi probably no longer needed help and that they might as well start preparing a burial plot instead. Levi continued gripping the exposed wires with his bare hands, while thin streams of smoke slowly began rising from his burning skin. Only moments later, a deafening explosion erupted, and the supporting pillars of the booth were violently shattered by the powerful blast wave. After the explosion, Levi's body was thrown down onto the grass below. His entire body was charred and burned, and sparks flickered faintly across his injured skin. The orderlies immediately shouted warnings for everyone to stay back, explaining that Levi's body, and even the ground beneath him, could still be carrying a deadly electrical charge. But Jasper ignored their warnings completely. Without hesitation, he rushed forward to check on his injured friend. When he saw Levi lying there, covered in burns with his clothes and skin turned dark from the damage, Jasper panicked and hurried toward him to help. However, Levi weakly lifted his hand to stop him, calmly saying that he was fine and simply felt a little tired. Despite this, Jasper had already stretched out his hand toward him. The moment their fingers touched, a sudden burst of electricity flashed violently between them. The powerful electric shock instantly threw both of them backward across the grass. Seeing the chaos, the manager nervously called the director again, asking whether he should call an ambulance or perhaps contact the crematorium instead. Soon afterward, Levi was rushed into the operating room. The doctor could barely hold back his tears as he realized he would have to perform surgery on this patient yet again. The doctor muttered that he was a doctor, not a god, and could not keep handling such impossible cases. Even though Levi's monitors still showed signs of life, nearly 90% of his body tissue had been destroyed by burns. Meanwhile, Lee tried to enter the operating room, but a nurse stopped him, explaining that the head surgeon could not find his scalpel, and without it the operation could not begin. Lee responded firmly that since the patient still showed signs of life, abandoning him was not an option. They had to do everything possible to save him. With that, Lee pushed past them and entered the operating room, declaring that he would personally perform the surgery himself. 10 long and exhausting hours passed after that. As the operation finally approached its end, a nurse quietly informed Lee that the director of the psychiatric hospital had arrived. She added that the director was currently waiting outside the operating room to speak with Dr. Lee. Shortly afterward, Lee stepped out of the operating room. The moment he saw the director standing there, his expression twisted with anger. Barely 3 days had passed since the director returned those patients to the hospital, and now Lee had discovered that they had been allowed to play with a transformer box before being brought back for emergency surgery. Furious, Lee stormed toward him while shouting curses without holding anything back. He yelled that he would never accept any apology. As far as he was concerned, that clinic might as well not exist. He demanded that the director leave immediately and first pay the bills for the escaped patient. However, Sean simply smiled calmly and explained that he had actually come to arrange an annual membership agreement with their hospital. When Lee heard this, his face twisted with disbelief and horror. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it toward Sean as if he intended to strike him. At that moment, several nurses rushed forward, grabbed Lee's arms, and desperately tried to calm him down. But Lee refused to back down. He shouted that he would absolutely kill the director. Eventually, the nurses and orderlies dragged him away, insisting he needed rest after the exhausting surgery. Meanwhile, the director calmly explained that he simply wanted to arrange a membership plan to save money, and he honestly saw nothing strange about that idea. One full day passed after that chaotic incident, and soon the next morning arrived. Jasper had fallen asleep beside Levi's hospital bed while waiting for him to wake up. Thankfully, Levi had only lost consciousness and suffered nothing fatal. During that time, the system quietly informed him that he had successfully completed body tempering and advanced to the middle stage of the Earth level. Eventually, Levi opened his eyes. As he stood up, he realized his entire body was wrapped in bandages. The system then explained that his cultivation technique required an extremely calm mind and perfect inner balance. It also mentioned that the technique had a side effect of rejuvenating the user's skin. When Jasper later removed the bandages, they discovered that the burned skin had peeled away completely, leaving flawless new skin beneath. Levi then walked quietly over to Jasper and gently tapped him on the shoulder. Jasper opened his eyes and immediately felt overjoyed when he realized that his friend had finally awakened. Levi sat in front of him completely naked, smiling warmly and peacefully at his friend. Just then, a nurse entered the room. When she saw Levi sitting up like that, she dropped the tray of medicine in shock. Within minutes, she had called several doctors and nurses into the room, pointing out that Levi's skin had become incredibly smooth and healthy overnight, even though it had been covered in severe burns the day before. Everyone present stared in disbelief, unable to accept that someone could recover so dramatically in just one night. Meanwhile, the story shifts back to the headquarters of the one-eyed man. His subordinates reported that Levi had jumped onto a transformer box, and they initially believed he had attempted suicide. The one-eyed man briefly wondered whether Levi should have been accepted for training, but now that thought seemed meaningless. Even though those two were crazy and constantly caused trouble around him, they had still been his roommates. So eventually, he thought he might have to light candles for them. At that moment, his communication device rang with a call from the director of the psychiatric clinic. The director informed him that both patients were still alive. Hearing this news left the one-eyed man completely stunned. He wondered whether even third-rank warriors could survive being thrown into a transformer box and realized that normally only fourth-rank warriors could endure something like that. This led him to suspect that those two strange guys with innate bodies might actually be above the fourth rank. After thinking about it, he decided that having fourth-rank warriors with such unusual innate bodies in his team might actually be very useful. When Sean noticed that the one-eyed man was reconsidering his proposal again, he felt quite pleased. He then left the hospital building while several clinic staff followed behind him, believing he had come to discuss the terms of the membership with the deputy. However, the director quickly told them not to follow him. He admitted that he was afraid the deputy might wake up and immediately grab a scalpel to kill him. The hospital orderlies exchanged uneasy glances, silently hoping the situation wouldn't spiral this far. None of them truly wanted to take such drastic measures, but the tension in the air made it clear that things were slipping beyond their control, and they feared the moment they might be forced to act. Sean calmly explained that the man probably just needed a proper night of sleep to recover. His voice carried a tired honesty, and he admitted that he himself could really use some rest as well after everything that had happened. Meanwhile, Liam, the same mental hospital guard who had once been frightened out of his wits by Levi and Jasper, had moved to a different room. He stayed in the hospital alongside his girlfriend, who patiently sat beside him and continued feeding him gently with a spoon, treating him with quiet care. As she walked across the room toward the dresser, Liam's eyes drifted to the bag she had set down. He couldn't help noticing how worn out it looked, its edges frayed and fabric faded, as if it had been carried around for decades. The girl brushed it off casually, saying it really wasn't a big deal. The bag was just a little torn, she explained, and it still worked perfectly fine for her. But Liam shook his head immediately, clearly unconvinced by her attempt to downplay it. With a serious look on his face, he insisted that there was no way he could allow his girlfriend to keep walking around with a bag that looked so damaged and worn. Without hesitation, Liam handed her his bank card. He told her that the card held the money he had been saving for quite some time. He urged her to take it, go shopping, and buy a brand new bag she truly liked. Then he added firmly that he would absolutely not be happy if she chose something cheap just to save money. The girl thanked him sincerely, clearly touched by his kindness. After a moment, she mentioned that the deputy had already heard Liam was hospitalized and planned to come by the hospital to visit him soon. Hearing this, Liam smiled warmly. He said that when the deputy arrived, he wanted to personally thank him for introducing him to such a wonderful girl in the first place. The girl immediately blushed with embarrassment after hearing those words. She lowered her gaze shyly and insisted that she really wasn't as amazing as Liam was making her sound. At the same time, somewhere nearby, an unknown presence was quietly observing the hospital visitors. Through a strange compound vision, like the many lenses of an insect's eye, someone was watching everything that was happening. Deputy Ivan, who secretly happened to be the lover of the same girl now spending time with Liam, came to the hospital to visit him. However, lately his eyesight had been getting worse and worse. He kept thinking back to when the problem first began, right after the day he decided to eat an unusually large portion of salmon. What Ivan never realized was that on that very day, a third-ranked demon known as Tahina Larval had been sitting directly on that piece of fish meat. As Ivan reached out to grab a piece of the salmon, he noticed a fly sitting on it. Still, he casually picked it up without thinking much about it. In that brief moment, the tiny creature managed to slip inside the meat. Ivan didn't notice anything unusual and simply swallowed the piece of fish along with it. Just like that, the hidden demon successfully entered Ivan's body without him having the slightest idea what had happened. Now Ivan felt terribly unwell. He had come to visit Liam, but deep down he knew he wouldn't have gone out of his way to come here unless he needed help with something extremely personal, his struggles with conceiving a child. However, as he stood there, Ivan suddenly realized that he felt unbelievably exhausted, as if every bit of energy had been drained from his body. Then something even stranger happened. He felt an intense pressure behind his back, like something inside him was pushing outward and beginning to grow. Moments later, two thin insect-like wings slowly burst out from his back, unfolding in a disturbing and unnatural way. At that exact moment, a nurse happened to be standing in the corridor nearby. She noticed Ivan immediately and sensed that something about the patient looked terribly wrong. Her face turned pale with horror as she watched the man transform right in front of her eyes into something grotesque, something that looked disturbingly similar to a giant fly. Terrified, she screamed at the top of her lungs that there was a monster in the hospital. The loud noise instantly enraged the creature, whose hearing had become painfully sensitive. With a twisted expression, he growled that her screaming made him want to tear her throat open and drink her blood. In the next instant, the monster grabbed the nurse by the head and violently hurled her across the corridor into a nearby room. Unfortunately, that room happened to be where Levi and Jasper were staying. The nurse slammed inside, suffering several serious injuries, and desperately begged the creature not to come any closer to her. Levi and Jasper looked up in confusion, having absolutely no idea what kind of chaos had suddenly erupted around them. Soon after, the monster entered the room, stepped toward the nurse, and wrapped a clawed hand around her neck. Struggling to breathe, the terrified woman pleaded with the two patients to save her. The creature muttered incoherently, spitting out threats and saying repeatedly that he would slit her throat. The nurse desperately hoped someone passing by the corridor would rush in to help her. But the moment the other nurses and orderlies caught sight of the monster, they all panicked and ran away without looking back. With blood filling her throat, the nurse could no longer scream. The monster could clearly see the injury and the blood slowly trickling from her mouth. Tears streamed down the nurse's face as she watched her coworkers run past the room, clearly unwilling to risk their lives to save her. At that moment, Jasper calmly walked up to the monster and casually poked his arm with a needle. He remarked that the patient seemed to have a very serious condition, something strange inside his body that urgently needed to burst out. Jasper stepped forward again and jabbed another needle into the monster's arm. He explained calmly that the creature appeared to be suffering from a severe internal problem and that whatever strange thing was growing inside him needed to be removed as soon as possible. Jasper added in a relaxed tone that acupuncture might actually help the monster recover. Even though the creature looked terrifying, Jasper still intended to treat him like any other patient. Hearing those words only made the monster even more furious. With a violent motion, he threw the nurse aside, sending her crashing hard against the wall. Then the creature stood up and shoved Jasper backward before quickly reaching forward with his clawed hand, clearly trying to grab Jasper by the neck. But before the monster could touch him, Levi suddenly moved. His hand shot forward and firmly caught the monster's claw midair. Levi stared at the creature coldly and warned him not to even think about laying a finger on his friend Jasper. Jasper calmly told Levi that he truly wanted to help the monster. He asked his friend to politely ask the creature whether he was willing to receive treatment or not. Levi turned his head slightly toward the monster and asked in a flat voice if he wanted Jasper's help. Instead of answering, the demon only continued ranting wildly about how he was going to cut their throats. Without saying another word, Levi tightened his grip and suddenly twisted the monster's arm downward with brutal force. A sickening cracking sound echoed as bone and flesh snapped. Levi calmly repeated the same question again, asking if the monster needed Jasper's help. The monster stared at his shattered arm in pure horror, unable to believe what had just happened. Filled with rage, he immediately lunged at Levi, determined to kill him. But his movements were far too slow. He swung his arm wildly at Levi again, but Levi simply stepped aside with ease, dodging the attack effortlessly. Then Levi stepped forward and grabbed the monster firmly by its insect-like wings. With a powerful jerk of his arm, Levi ripped one of the wings clean off the monster's back. The creature collapsed onto the floor immediately. Blood poured from its wounds, and its entire body trembled from exhaustion and pain. Levi walked up to the fallen monster and calmly told him that his injuries looked pretty serious. Then he asked again whether he wanted Jasper's help. When the monster still didn't respond, Levi grabbed him by the chest and dragged him closer. Levi shrugged slightly and said that, in his opinion, the monster clearly needed Jasper's help whether he admitted it or not. Since the creature couldn't answer, Levi grabbed him by the neck and carried him over to Jasper, saying that the patient was now ready to receive treatment. Jasper raised an eyebrow and asked Levi why he was holding the patient in such an uncomfortable position, pointing out that the monster probably wasn't enjoying it very much. Levi casually replied that he had once carried a girl in the exact same way before, so he assumed the monster might actually like that position. Jasper chuckled and nodded, amused by his friend's logic. Without wasting any more time, Jasper lifted a needle and drove it straight into the monster's forehead. The monster hissed loudly in agony as blood began streaming down from the puncture, while the injured nurse watched everything unfold in shock. Soon the monster's head was completely covered with dozens of needles. Jasper prepared himself to perform a powerful technique known as the half-step rotation of the universe,